Hello and welcome to another Imperfectly Perfect, Perfectly Imperfect Conversation for the Flourishing Education podcast. Today I'm delighted to bring you my new guest, Zifi Tung. A very warm welcome to the podcast, Zifi.
Thank you so much for having me. Very delighted to be here.
Yes, wonderful. So for our listeners, we connected because I attended a presentation you gave recently. Um, about your research. So you're obviously clearly a researcher. So I wanted to sort of start with that, sharing that we connected previously because sometimes it helps the listeners. But could we start with the first question I ask all of my guests, which is, who are you, Zifi? Where are you in the world? And what
hmm
has been your journey in education so far?
Yes, so I'm 26. I am born in Hong Kong. I identify both as Chinese and British, as I grew up in international schools. And I spent most of my adult life in Bath. And right now I'm a final year PhD student at University of Bath, and I'm finishing soon. Where am I in the world? I'm right now in an apartment with my partner in London temporarily. And then just because I'm in the writing up stage, trying to shift the venue and just trying to finish writing up. My journey in education is, I believe it's a bit of an interesting one. So I was born in Hong Kong and I moved to Beijing a very young age. And I was very lucky enough to be enrolled in international school because my mom has a very strong value on education, and she really wanted me to experience something that was different from the local school system in China. And so I have experienced international schools. There was very hands-on learning, play-based learning. I loved just going to school every day. And then we had to move back to Hong Kong around 2008, where again, continuing international school because that was what I was used to. And it was under the international baccalaureate curriculum, where they focus on critical thinking and holistic education. And again, I loved going to school every day. I was curious, I was engaged, I really enjoyed learning. And the teachers made difficult concepts very fun. So having this really great, and I loved going to school every day, I kind of developed a strong desire to give back. So originally, I wanted to become a teacher because I really love working with children. So when it was come time to decide what to do for university, I chose to do education with psychology at the University of Bath. And that kind of opened, I guess, like a can of worms of things that I didn't know existed because I just thought I was there to learn about how children learn and how children behave and how really school and education works. But instead, it kind of exposed me to educational inequalities in low income countries and high income countries, educational policies and how that impacts student learning, and then learning and reading about like real students' experiences in the UK, mostly in the state education system. So after that, I was like, okay, I finished this. I loved my degree. It was such an amazing experience. And I was like, okay, should I do teacher training now? Because I always wanted to be a teacher. Or should I do a master's in research? Because I really enjoyed researching and listening to people. So I did because it was during COVID, I did my undergrad dissertation on asking undergraduate students on their experiences of online learning and how like the shift happened. And through that, I was like, wow, it's very nice to hear their experiences and really understand like how the COVID pandemic and online learning have affected them. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do the master's in research. And when that happened, I had to write a proposal and kind of figure out what my dissertation would be for my master's. So I was thinking, okay, since I really enjoyed schooling and I was thinking back and I was like, none of my classmates enjoyed school as much as I did. And a lot of them would skip school, you understand, like final year, like because we did the IB and we had the GCSEs. It was like hard, like studying and exams, and I understand that. But I really enjoyed and I was really curious about learning. And I really do, looking back, like commend the teachers and how much effort they put in and to make learning fun for us. So I was like, okay, let me look into what makes learning fun and what makes learning can be fun and motivating for students. So I started with that idea, and then it slowly turned into play, because I'm like, oh, play is a very core part. There's play-based learning and hands-on learning is gaining traction, and people are gaining more awareness of how good that is for students and learning. So I was like, okay, before I look into play and I was very focused on teenagers because I found out that a lot of the studies looking on play was focused on young children, particularly early years and primary school students. So I was like, okay, let me just do a definition, like trying to figure out what play means before I go into studying how teenagers perceive play. So for my master's, I did a systemic review of 30 definitions of play, and not to bore anyone, listeners, the conclusion is that there are no one single definition, and that everyone has their own and is a subjective. And there are some core features that some authors agree on, but I was like, okay, that's what I'm gonna go with. So then I was like, okay, I want to do a PhD now because this kind of like ignited a passion of mine. And I was very lucky enough to be funded by my mom, who I'm very, very grateful for my education. And so I was like, okay, let me now I know what play means and the general public and scholars and adults. So I was like, okay, I want to find out what teenagers think play means. So I did all the research. I went through all the milestones, and then I started my field work at a secondary school in Southwest England. So I went in and I was like, okay, I'm going to do map making. So essentially, my questions were, what do teenagers define play as? Where do these playful experiences occur? And how do school policies and facilities impact these experiences? But on the first day, like I ran into something. I started the session. I was like, oh, like, what do you think play means? They were like, year eights. And like, what does play mean to you? And the answers I got was like, what do you mean by play? And like, we don't play anymore. And I was like, oh, this is not going great at all because this was my first day. And I was like, I'm going to do a PhD on play, and it was just not working. And so I kind of went with the flow. And instead, I changed the question to like, what do you do for fun? What do you do during break and lunch times, which is like the free time? And then slowly, slowly, it became the same answers of being with friends, hanging out, chatting, eating, playing football for the boys, especially. And then it just kind of went with the flow. And then now, and then I collected all my data, and then I analyzed it, and then I decided that I initially sought out to start with play, and technically all of their answers and my data shows that they experience like playfulness and the features of play, so like freedom and like having fun and motivated. But I didn't want to kind of pigeonhole their answers and make it and say it is play because they don't think it is. So instead, I changed my questions, and now it's more broad of like, what do teenagers do during break and lunch times? Where do they go during break and lunch in schools? And how do school policies and facilities impact their choices? So that's like my main like overview of um my research questions. And yeah, now I'm just writing up and then submitting in a couple months. and then hopefully finding a job in a charity or something that's we'll talk about a little bit more about my findings, but something that I can like help and like make a difference and make awareness of like some of the issues that came up in my study.
Mm. Amazing. Thank you for sharing so generously and beautifully. It's so lovely to have your journey. Um, So first of all, I want to celebrate and acknowledge your very positive experience of school, right? Because in
Yes.
my world, most people don't have a positive
Yeah.
experience. So yay you. I think it's great, right?
Yes.
That's wonderful. And I think maybe we can also celebrate your mum
Yeah,
in that
definitely.
process, right?
Yes.
And I think uh maybe we can also acknowledge perhaps the something that I truly believe, you know, as a white working class, of, you know, I was
Mm,
racialized as a white working class woman, and I think what's really important is also, whilst I've also worked in independent schools, so I think they're wonderful, and they people pay a lot of money
yeah.
to access those schools, right?
Yeah.
So but often my friends sort of say, "Why are you so anti-independent schools in the UK?" And I say, "I'm not
Mm,
anti, it's just that I think it would be wonderful if all children could have Eton
yes.
experiences, right?
Yes.
Compared to mainstream."
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so I wanted to sort of like acknowledge all of that in the room, right? Because
Yeah.
I think it's quite important.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so thank you for that and for sharing. Um, as a linguist, I'm really interested in wondering whether we could just linger a tiny little bit on what you said about play and the different definitions,
Yeah.
because I was really struck by what you said about like these young year eights who said to you, "What do you mean? What's play?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I often joke with my friends about how as adults we become so serious,
Yeah.
right? And so like you've got to work and you know
Yeah.
like right? And so
Yeah.
could we linger here a little bit and you
Mm-hmm.
give us all
Mm.
of your insights in terms of, you know, what is play? How do we, and you know, what's the definition you use, for example, or that you like the most?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for that. Yeah, so it seems that as a society, and I do agree with you that when it comes to when children start going to school, it seems like play isn't a thing anymore. They there's something about when you start primary school that you're serious now and you have to start learning. And there was a brilliant study done where they interviewed I think 5-year-olds, so they were in nursery, and then interviewed them again in year one. And they were like, and parents as well, and they're like, they don't play, and there's a huge, huge difference. And I work in a nursery, so I have experience. It's just play the whole day. Like there's no serious learning time. Whereas when school starts, it's very structured, and the only play they get is during break and lunch times. And we can talk about that in a bit, where I'm very passionate about that. There's not enough, and it's getting shorter, and there's a lot of problems with that. And that's one of the things my study is trying to address. And so it seems to be not just Western society. It seems because I was doing a lot of like soul searching. I was kind of wondering like, why don't kids play anymore? There is a whole literature out there about like gaming, and that some people say it's playing. Um, but then there are also scholars saying it's not actually playing because they're like not outside or they're not actually socializing, or there's a lot of, I think in that play world, everyone has their own opinions about what it is, but there are some like scholars that have been referenced multiple times across the years. They're like not like the founding fathers, but like kind of equivalent of like play. And they say and kind of agree that it's not work. So it's free, it's self intrinsically motivated, which means that they do it because they want to. Some argue it's imaginative and some don't. And there's a one like feature that came up a lot, which I was very confused about. It's called separate from time and space. So I was trying to wrap my head around it. And essentially, what that means is that you're not actually in reality. So that refers to like imaginative play for children, where an example would be if you walk.
And sorry, Zifi, can you
Yeah.
repeat the name of that particular sort of?
Oh, separate from time and space.
Ah, okay, okay.
So an example would be like an adult, like me, walking past a playground, and then a child's like pretending that the playground is a pirate ship. To me, I'm like, that's just, a playground. But to the child, it's a pirate ship and they're a pirate. And so that's like an example of being separate from time and space. But then that's just one example of like imaginative play. And my issue with these features is that when you apply for different things, like for example, playing a game of football, some people argue, and a lot of people would say that's playing and you're playing a game, but that's not separate from time and space because it's real, it's happening, it's a competition or a game. So there's a lot of these conflicting narratives and features that don't really fit, and especially now there's so many different types of play and with ages. And in a book that I read, that in the section about like adolescence, it was just like activities and like games, like chess and like board games, but they don't say that, or yeah, they don't say that they engage in imaginative play. And so that was kind of, I guess, it's kind of a conundrum of like me trying to figure out all these different definitions and trying to come up with my own, and trying to fit as many types of play and ages and gender and everything together. But I just I didn't give up, but I just kind of like came to the conclusion that to everyone has their own definition of what it is. But there is a general consensus that when kids grow older, there is less play. And that's kind of due to the society and how we are as a society, that it's serious. And if you look at adults, for example, you don't really see an adult going to the playground, going on the swings. I mean, I love to do that, but I don't because there's children and I want the children to play. But there's something against like being silly and something against being fun, because we're adults, especially in the researcher and academic world. Everything we do is work, and I think there's something that needs to change, and that this is something, and it is changing. I mean, there's more and more um adults now, I know, like they're playing games, like video games, and like there's board games, and that's great, and I think it's a good thing. But in terms of, I think with teenagers, what I realized that they're an age group that really need to play, and they need to stop going on their phones and go outside. And we talk about that because it's also part of my research. Yeah, and it's a problem. I think that there needs to be more play. And so part of my research was that how do we incorporate more play? Because of my experience of international school, and it's possible. It is possible because I lived through it. How do we kind of change the way the curriculum is taught, and maybe teacher training, and kind of just change the way of learning and not the traditional way? Because I'm very anti-traditional.
Yay!
Yes. Yeah. So we're the same people. Yes.
And so thanks for sharing. I think for me it's this. So I distinctively remember my eldest going from reception to year one and
Hmm.
what it did to his soul.
Yeah.
It like literally, he went the like how you beautifully described. I remember he was all over the room, playing and curious, and and I've shared previously on the podcast, my eldest in particular would ask really, sometimes I was like, wow, where do those questions come from? So I remember once he sort of told me, he probably was about 4 or 5, and said, Mummy, why doesn't the bird get electrocuted when he lands on the I mean, you
Yeah.
know, so I sort of looked at him and I was like, I don't know. And like, what sort of question is that? You're five, right? But that's the person he is. He's 18. He still asks really deep questions and amazing questions. It's wonderful. Um, but I noticed as he went to school, those questions stopped
Yeah.
and the playfulness stopped. And the same with his brother, who's 16. So my eldest is 18 and my youngest is 16. And so, what you were sharing reminds me of what I'm reading a lot for the PhD around, because my PhD is participatory
Mm,
research with youth, with young people like you.
mm,
Um, and I'm reading around like the adultism, like
mhm.
the how we adults, right, look at
Yeah.
these young people,
Yeah.
um, and we somehow see them as adults that are not quite
Yeah.
adults, right? Like
Yeah.
in the making.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your thoughts are, but do we through our systems literally squeeze the fun and the
Mhm.
joy out of those kids? Is that
Yeah.
what we do?
Yeah. I mean, particularly for primary schools, like I heard like back in I think a couple months, years ago now, I shared my research with a parent and she was telling me that at her school, primary school, I think, it was a rainy day and there was puddles, and then some of the students decided to jump in the puddles because they're thinking it was fun. And then the next day they had a whole school assembly telling the students, like trying to identify who were the students that jumped in the puddles. And like I don't know, I don't want to spread fake stories, but I feel like they had pictures or they were like trying to ask the students to rat the other students out. And I was like horrified because
That
I'm
is
like,
like, what?
yeah, because and the whole assembly was about how you're supposed to be serious, you have your school uniform, you shouldn't be jumping in puddles. And I was sitting there like, what is, yeah, that's just one
No.
school. And it's the lesson from that story that I got was the teachers and the head teachers and the head of, like, I understand, like, yes, you're jumping in the puddles now, your uniform is wet and then it
Yeah.
doesn't look good or it's
Yeah.
not
And you're gonna
comfortable.
be cold and it's not fun when you're cold, right?
Yeah, and I get all that, but at the same time it's like let them be children, like especially
Yeah.
primary school.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
for me in secondary school, I feel like, I mean, the biggest, I think, limitation of my study is that I only did it at one school. And it was quite rural and they had a lot of open space. And I've never seen so much greenery and open space ever. Because in my secondary school in Hong Kong, it was just like multi-floor buildings, like all concrete, and there's
Yeah.
rarely any trees and we
Yeah.
had a lot of amenities, but it wasn't very like natural in nature.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was the space, but the issue was that it was very interesting and not very surprising that the teenagers spent time with their friends and they're at certain areas with their friends. But the biggest thing that came up was the boys would dominate spaces like the AstroTurf, the sports hall, like the courts. And the girls were telling me, because I was very lucky to become a part of a year 10 girls group. So I was like in their group, I was like their friend. And they told me a lot of things. And like the first thing when I asked, like, oh, do you have anything you want to tell me about the school? They're like, we have nowhere to go and we have nothing to do. And these are like direct quotes. But when I was with them, they are doing things. They're chatting. Sometimes they're going on their phones. They're not supposed to, but they do. And they are watching their crushes and like looking at them because they're the ones playing football on the AstroTurf. And to me, that's doing something. But to them, in their minds, they're not doing anything because they see the boys moving around, playing football, being active, and like doing a proper activity, whereas they're just sitting there and chatting with each other. And so that's something that kind of was shocking to me in a way because it was 2025. did the study last year, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but like the European football championship, the England women's team won twice. So 2022 and 2025. So I was like, oh, surely there should be, and I know that because of their wins, there are more girls playing football. And but I found out that that's just outside of school. And so in
Mhm.
my study, I'm kind of arguing that there needs to be more awareness and encouragement around girls being active, and then speaking to other people from conferences and people with experience. Were in state schools and now they're like older, like adults now, and they would say things like, yeah, because we'll get sweaty, and then like we don't have showers or like the boys do, and like there's still this kind of gender stereotype in place, and which I found was shocking because I thought everything was great because the England team was won. They won, I watched it, and I was happy. Like this is great for women. But yeah, in the schools it's like, oh,
Different. And you know what's really interesting? You're talking about this gendered approach, right? What I'm really struck what you've just shared is almost also this divide between the doing and then the talking, right? Because women are good at talking
yeah,
and sitting with one another and
yeah,
holding space for one another, right?
yeah.
That's one of our strengths as
Mm-hmm.
women.
Mm-hmm.
And then, maybe and this is slightly stereotyping, right? But this idea that the boys will be playing football or doing more things, right? So I'm struck by two things. Those stereotyping, like, and this sort of like
Mm-hmm.
very clear demarcations, but also how the women, the girls, are actually naming the what they do so beautifully and effortlessly as doing nothing
Mm-hmm.
rather than being together as
Yeah.
girls, right?
Yeah.
Which is really, that would be a very different way of framing it, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but it may seem to be that. But what was interesting in the study was that they never said like, "Oh, I want to play football," or "I want to be there." It seems like there's kind of like a invisible barrier, and they just assumed that the AstroTurf and these areas belong to the boys, which there's no written rule for it. It's like this kind of invisible barrier that they just assume that's their spot. And then
Yeah.
whereas the girls are on the sidelines. And I don't, and again, in my thesis, I link it to the wider social culture and community. Football has always, and along with other sports, have always been quite masculine. And it's still seems like that's just what they do, like football is just what they do. And it'll be very interesting to find out and have another study done, maybe not by me, but like a male researcher going in and like incorporating themselves in a male group and see what they talk about and what do they do. There are boys that don't play football, of course. That's totally, normal. But again, it comes back to friends are the most important. They do what their friends are doing. And that's not, I always tell people this, it's not the most surprising find because we all know, and literature shows in our own experiences during high school, friends are important. And if you didn't have friends, you didn't want to go to school.
They're the basis, right?
Yes,
Like
that's
of developing new identity. And I wonder, is there an element in your study around, psychological development of the teenage over the teenage years and this identity piece? So are there any things that emerge from your study that sort of that relates to the identity? Because as we talking, one of the things that I've been reflecting a lot about, like for my own PhD,
mm-hmm,
which is also in secondary schools, is um and it links to what you said about those year eight saying to you, what do you mean play? Like,
Mhm.
sort of, we don't play anymore,
Yeah.
right? I wonder if it's almost like you go from being born to being this baby toddler child, right? Like where
Mhm.
you just sort of like learn to be in the world,
Yeah.
and then you learn to sort of like, or you're supposed to sort of like develop this sort of understanding of
Yeah.
your body and who you are, right?
Yeah.
um and then if you've done that effectively psychologically in a safe and secure environment, you should be
Mm.
grounded into,
Yeah.
hey, this is me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you can be an adult, right? And be of service.
Yes.
And I wonder whether there's anything that's emerged in your research around um that that you've noticed, or in terms of
Mm.
identity of teenagers.
I mean, when I was like doing research, because my background isn't in psychology, but I did like in my undergrad did dabble in a bit about like developments of children. And I think my study just kind of contributes to all studies out there that's saying that friendship is very important for teenagers, especially like in secondary schools, because that is when identity development happens. And there was a study saying that that period is, and I can attest to it, is when you spend more time with your friends than your parents. And I've heard somewhere that when you become a teenager, and I've read a book somewhere about it, is when you see your parents as real people.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah,
cringe.
yeah, cringe, exactly. And you realize that they're not perfect. And
Yes.
then as the age, what is, there was a book, I will think about it, but it was a very good book on, I think, on teenage brains. It was written by a psychiatrist. And he was saying, because it was all about rebelling and why
Mm,
teenagers rebel.
mm, mm, mm.
And it is at a period where they start to think, have their own ideas, start questioning things because they start to see their parents as real people. And so they're like, oh, okay, so they're not perfect. Like,
Yeah.
why do I have to listen to them? It's like your parent tells you, like your mom tells you to be home by 10. You're like, I don't want, why? And
Yeah, why
yeah,
do I
why,
have
yeah,
to?
why should I
Yeah,
do that?
why should
And
I
then
do that?
depending on
And
who,
the values also, right? Like
yeah,
questioning the
yeah,
values you've been given, because
yeah,
you're like, well, those are yours. I'm
yeah.
not sure mine are quite aligned
Yeah.
with yours anymore, right?
And especially with friends, then who you spend most of your time at school with your friends, and now with social media, I don't even want to know how many hours they spend just with their friends and being online. Whatever your friends are into, because it's, and I use theory, social identity theory, Tadford and Turner, where it's still very apparent in my study where they have this identity. Um, and there's a very like in group versus out group mentality. So in my thesis, I had to explain how I became an in group. They would call me my bestie, and they would treat me differently to people who they didn't consider to be in their friend group. And it was very intense, and I did not expect that. But it's still very apparent, and it really shows that like the dynamics and the strength of friendship with teenagers and how strong that is in that period. And so that's something that's emerged out of my study that I kind of didn't anticipate to find, because I'm like, surely it's different now because there's phones involved in social media, and maybe because I originally thought they'd just be on their phones during break and lunchtime. So that's what I've been hearing from parents and uh, news and things. But actually,
And they're
they,
not. They're
yeah.
not on their
So
phone.
actually, so the group I was with, they would be on their phone sometimes just to like check their messages and like Snapchat, but most of the time they would talk to each other like in person. And I was kind of wondering, is it because I'm there? Because I'm not on my phone, of course. Maybe I kind of contributed to that. But what I have seen is that like real socialization and talking to each other and having a great time actually. And so my study is kind of ending on a positive note, saying that, well, I didn't mention the rationale of the study is that I have seen a lot of news articles and especially analysis done by the Guardian that um and other people that the playgrounds are shutting down, like community spaces are disappearing for young people, and less people, young people are spending time outside because there's nowhere to go, and there's no time, like they just go home, and the parents are afraid, or there's just too much dangers, which I totally understand. And then I make the argument that okay, then they're at school 38 weeks a year. That's around 74%. And I'm like, okay, schools are going to be the place where they socialize. No. There's also analysis showing that some schools don't have outside spaces, especially like inner city areas. And then on top of that, break times and lunch times are getting shorter, and then that's like even more limited time. So where do the teenagers go? They go online. And so I make the argument that social media and phone use have such an increase, and especially after the pandemic, it was bad. I mean, not just for the teenagers, all of us adults, everyone was had so many hours online working and then also socially, and because we couldn't go outside because of the lockdown. And but even after the pandemic, this kind of behavior just continued. And so my argument was that we need to kind of protect the time and spaces in schools because they're spending so much time in schools. And through my research, how socialization is so very important and they're not getting it anywhere else. And I can see the benefits and the teenagers enjoying it with their friends. And so if the break and lunchtime situation is not improving, there may be some ways where we can incorporate it into curriculum or having some time or some changes where it kind of enables and encourages this kind of socialization. Because I was writing up my literature review and it was very depressing. But I was trying to understand the perspective of schools and how they're dealing with all this. And I don't even want to be, I commend all schools and all the things that they have to work with because funding is always an issue. And especially with COVID, they weren't equipped. Like so many studies show that. And a recent government commissioned research by the Scottish government showed that a lot of students have been misbehaving, and then there's like a record high number of suspensions, and students are just they just don't, because of the pandemic, there's been a delay in communication skills and social skills, and that's impacted like a whole generation. And so my argument is kind of like we need to not fix, okay, there's no easy fix to the problem, but all of these issues like social skills and communication skills can be improved. And where can that be improved? In schools, because they're all the time. And so instead of like having that traditional like the teacher in the front and students listening, I would just recommend like having more like cooperative learning, or having more learning where like my how I experience, where you let the students do the thinking by themselves. So I have a really great example, and I hope my memory is intact. When we were in year five in primary school, we were learning about fair trade chocolates. I have no idea what that was because I was like, what do you mean chocolate is fair trade? So what the teacher made us do was that she split us into groups, and one group was like the farmer, one group was like the processor, the other group was the seller, and then we would make chocolates out of like cardstock, and then like we'll wrap it up, and it was like this whole process. And then in the end, they would be like, "This is how much you get paid," and we're like, "What? That's like nothing." And then after all this exercise of this hands-on learning and like uh cooperative learning, whatever you want to call it, you kind of learn through the experience of like what it means instead of just being told what fair trade chocolate is, which I probably wouldn't have understood anyways. So that's kind of these like little experiences, and I know that I'm just a researcher and I'm just giving ideas, but I think there could be some kind of like trial or some kind of like um to see if it works, and then see how the kids are doing. Are the communication and social skills improved? How how are their socialization? Like how is the misbehavior level? It is extra work and it's always extra work for teachers. I really commend all teachers and how much work they have to do. But it's something that could be considered and maybe research more into and kind of hone in on the importance of socialization and using that to um, and the benefit for learning. Because one of the funniest things with the group of 10 girls was that I don't think they enjoyed school. Like they are only there because their friends are there. And I don't, every lesson they just complain, like, oh, I hate this, I hate that. And then one day I asked them what's the lesson after lunch. And they were like maths. And then the other girls were like, oh, I love maths. And I was like, what? What? This is there's no way. So then at the end of lunch, and I was walking them to their class, I realized all four of the girls had maths together. I was like, that makes sense. Because other lessons they have they're separate. So I was like, oh, that really makes sense. Maybe that is the key to keeping the students motivated and enjoying school. But that needs more research. Yeah.
This is awesome though, because there's so many things I'd like to discuss in what you've just shared. The first one is I want to share a couple of things. So when I wrote the second book I wrote was with Dr. Dominic Thompson for parents, and it's
Mm-hmm.
called How to Grow a Grown Up. And in there, we actually show how literally in the UK
Mm.
the access of young people has literally shrunk.
Yeah.
How little
Yeah.
um, they're not allowed. So I compare my generation. I grew up in the 70s. I often refer to myself as a teenager as a cat. I would literally come out and come home when I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
hungry,
Yeah.
really. And my parents, I mean, I often think my parents, I don't know, did they not worry? I don't know, it's just weird. It's like they
Yeah.
let me go off
Yeah.
with friends, right? It's interesting that I've become one of the parents that now has like
Yeah.
is just so anxious about my
Yeah.
children. um, you know, so there's that. So this anxiety that,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like you believe your children are safer at home, right?
Yeah.
Like the stranger danger, all of
Yeah.
those things created. Um, so that's the parents sort of side. But also there's one thing we haven't discussed, so like my research in the lack of well-being in education is often like a lot of people say to me, oh yeah, COVID was horrible because it's like that's the cause. And I'm like, nah, like
No.
the problem existed way
Yes.
before I started
Yeah.
researching in 2014. There was already a problem with well-being, lack of
Yeah.
well-being back
Mm-hmm.
then, right? So COVID compounded the
Yeah.
existing problems, right?
Yes.
First. And then second, the things like the misbehavior and the
Mm-hmm.
social skills and all of those things. So yes, of course, COVID, the not being in the school or all of those things, this narrative. But I think what we're not really also addressing is this traditional thing, like
Yeah.
the systems. I've just co-authored a third book about education that's going to come out in the summer. And in that, I talk a lot about the reality is that our current schooling system
Mm.
is a schooling system that dates back to
Yeah.
Victorian times,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, so perhaps and you alluded to that with like the teacher at the front, right? And the things that your teachers in
Mm-hmm.
IOB and all of those
Yeah.
things. got you to do, which is so different from mainstream in England,
Yeah.
where, you have a curriculum
Yeah.
and we're going to cram. And actually, as a recovering language teacher, I can understand why some of the teenagers were bored in my language classes,
Yeah.
because quite frankly, why would you? I mean, I was my youngest had his French oral this morning for his GCSEs. So before he went, we were just having this conversation, and I said, "Isn't it funny, Jack, that like they're asking you, où est la bibliothèque, right, in French? Where's the library?" When I go, A, you probably will never go to the library in France. And B, like you've got Google Map anyway. So what are the chances of you asking someone that question, right?
Hmm.
Why do we not get our young people to ask things about the gaming or like the things they're interested in, right? Um, so I don't know. I wonder whether it's a long sort of like thing share
Yeah.
with around where does the systemic, the traditionalness of the school, like fits in your research and what young people say about it.
Um, it is still very traditional. I think that one of the biggest findings from my study, which I didn't anticipate at all, was how do the school rules and like policies and facilities impact the students? And this is probably the most like depressing part of it, where I did talk about already about the girls not being able to access certain areas because of the stereotypes and of how boys dominate most of the sport spaces. But the other thing is that what I realized, and it's not a surprising finding in a way, is that it's very top down. And so the school and the senior leadership team, the board, government funding, all of that determines everything. And I know that funding is already a huge issue across our country, but um, it's really sad. And I think I totally agree with you that there needs to be like a massive change. Like I really feel like the government should invest in like a change in like the way we teach children, and a kind of look at the curriculum, because I was listening to a interview, I think, on the BBC, where he was a teacher and he was saying that there's no point, or in I mean, students struggle a lot with reading clocks because they don't need to read like analog clocks because they don't need to anymore. And then another thing is money, where he's teaching them about the coins and the notes, and they're like, "What? Like, what is happening?" And I agree, because the times have changed. I don't even use cash anymore. I don't know when's the last time I used like a 50p. And there's something real in what he said, that there needs to be kind of a change in the way we teach um the new generation, which is now generation beta, I believe, which is it's crazy to me. But the world is changing, I think, much, especially now with
And
AI.
AI, right? Like AI
Yeah,
and
AI, everything. And the school system's kind of exactly like you said, it's like it needs to
stuck in the Victorian times. And
yes,
then
exactly.
these young people have like the world in their pockets without the skills to handle it, right? Like and some of the darkness of it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
As well. Um,
Yeah.
so to me, it's just, yeah, I'd sort of look at it and just go, okay, you know, and I get it, I'm a recovering language teacher. I get it. I was in the classroom. I also, when I managed the French language provision, I was like a managerial, position in institutions. I understand if you are, in a school and a leader of a school,
Mm,
and you literally have responsibility for 2,000 young
yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like herding, you know, a, a flock of sheep, like,
Yeah.
and making sure that they're all like hurling along, right? It's that's sadly the reality, right?
Yeah.
Back to the funding and all of those
Yeah.
things. But I wonder whether, so what I heard with like what I love about the work you've done is, so for me, the reason with my work I'm doing participatory work with young people is I think they're so wise. We
Yeah.
need to listen to our young people
Yeah.
because they have a lot of really,
Mm-hmm.
really cool ideas that
Yes.
we could really, really learn from, right?
Yeah.
Or be inspired by.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I'm so like it's their voices are so important. Like they never get asked. And one of the it was really sad. One of the because I didn't have access to year 11s and year 13s due to like formally due to exams. So but when I was out and about during break and lunch times, I met a group of year 11 girls and I was telling them what I was doing and how I did like map making activities with them with the other year groups. And one of the girls said, "That's not fair. Like they never invite us for anything." And that again, it's like that's yeah. And so it's really sad, but I was glad that I was able to get their opinions on things. But there definitely and I do understand the like ethical, like when it comes to research, there's a lot of ethical concerns and like not all schools want to be involved with research and things. But at the same time, I see so many like my colleagues and conferences are going to primary schools and early years settings, and that must be even harder for ethical clearance because they're young children. And maybe it's because teenagers are scary. They have a reputation
Well,
of being, yeah,
I think it's because we adults are scared of
yeah,
teenagers. We just don't know. We don't know. And maybe we
yeah,
remember being
yeah,
teenagers, and so we're like,
yeah,
oh, I don't know if I want to go there. I love teenagers. I
yeah.
think they just rock personally.
It-
Um, but I wonder whether there's something around what you were saying with like the year 11s and the year 13, which we haven't addressed yet,
mhm,
which is also really important, is that the reality, and I don't know if it was the same for you doing IOB, like
mhm,
the international baccalaureate
yeah,
and all of those things, which is also a very adultist world and the world of the neoliberal
mhm,
capitalist world, right? Is
yeah,
that the reality of schooling is you are being schooled
yeah,
starting from your SATs in
yeah,
primary school
mhm,
for the holy grail that is university.
yeah,
So you go SATs, GCSEs, A
mhm, yeah,
levels to go to university,
mhm,
preferably Oxbridge. If you can't, then a Russell Group University. And if you're really unlucky, bless you, then you'll go to a post 92 uni. And
yeah,
it's like, oh, it's not as great, right? But that's literally what the funnel, the herding the sheep does,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I don't think we address that openly enough.
mhm,
And we also don't openly address the what do we ask our young people to do with their GCSEs and their A levels, and certainly in state schools,
mhm,
it's all about take those facts, absorb, blah,
yeah,
regurgitate. There
yeah.
isn't any of the things that you've done in your IOB where there's critical thinking as much, right?
I think that there is something, and I don't know that I think I totally agree on like everything you said, and I don't know if there's any hope for a change in the way our society works and the neoliberalism of it, and how it's just all like a stepping stone to the ladder of university, and then eventually you work. But I want to say that maybe we can make the schooling experience better and not make it
Yeah,
better and
yeah.
not kind of really changing it because it's the 2026 is not the Victorian era anymore. To incorporate more like hands-on learning or fun learning and encouraging more critical thinking because and changing some of the not necessarily changing some of the subjects but like having yeah like a a lesson or something on critical thinking or more updated curriculum, let's put it that way, on things like AI and like how to spot a scam or whether the video you're watching is AI or not. Because these are some of the skills that they need when they're progressing through life, or especially once school is over. And I think that there is we have talked about a lot, and it is, I don't want to end it like on a depressing note. There are so many issues out there, especially in the education world, and there is not enough awareness and funding and attention from the government, because they're more um, preoccupied with other issues. But what they're always forgetting is that these children and young people are the future, and we need to like invest in them and making sure that they are equipped with the skills and the
Yeah.
knowledge
Yeah.
and be happy. Hope that is a very important
Yeah.
thing. Like well-being is such a huge problem.
Yeah. And what was really funny is I often say to people, to adults, even if you don't care deeply about teenagers like I do, and you're not passionate about their well-being like I am,
Mhm.
think that these people are potentially going to be paying your pension when you're older. So if like just think selfishly, if
Yes.
they're not well enough in the current system, no people working or doing the work they
Yeah.
like, no people financing your pensions, unless you're privileged enough to have a private pension,
Yeah.
that's a but like state pensions, that's what's gonna happen. So
Yeah.
they are the future, and they're also our future leaders and our
Yes.
future politicians, and the future of the world. So I agree with you, it matters deeply and greatly.
Yeah.
um yeah. I'm conscious of time, Zifi, but I wonder whether I've not bless you, I've not asked you a question that you're like sitting here thinking, oh, I so wish Fabian had asked me this question.
No. I think we covered a lot of things. I think
Yeah.
I've covered most. Yeah, I have no questions in mind.
And no other thing you want to share. So if people want to reach out to you, how do they find you in the noise of the educations of where do they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. If you just put my name in, Zifi Tung, Zifitung, and I should pop up. And after when the podcast is uploaded, I will be sharing it. And I will be sharing it with my contacts as well, so everyone can listen. And please feel free to reach out to me.
Amazing. Um, Thank you. I mean, it's been such a joy talking with you today. Thank you for your amazing research. Um, I'm sure there'll be many more conversations we can have together, particularly because like Bath, you're so close to
Yeah,
where I am. Like
yeah.
let's meet up in person when you're next
Yes.
in Bath. That'd be nice.
Hmm.
Um, to wrap up and finish, I wonder whether you would like to leave us with something, and or you're taking something away from this conversation, both.
Hmm. I just want to say, well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me and sharing my research. It's such a blessing to be here. Um, to end the podcast, I think on a positive note, that I just hope that there is more awareness and more care around listening to teenagers' voices, because they are extremely important and often unheard, and that we should actually rely on them because they're going to be our future.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you for holding that space for them. I'm sure they were really, really grateful for your amazing work.
Thank you.